The summer sun dipped low over the sprawling estate, casting golden hues over the manicured gardens and glimmering pool. The Hamilton family reunion was in full swing. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the air as generations of relatives mingled, reminiscing about old times. At the center of it all stood Evelyn Hamilton, her sharp blue eyes scanning the gathering. She had a secret, and tonight, it would no longer be hers alone. Evelyn's husband, Daniel, moved through the crowd with his usual charm, a wine glass in hand and a disarming smile. He was the picture of confidence, wearing the expensive suit she had bought him for their 10th anniversary. But Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes when she watched him. It had started months ago, an innocuous text on his phone she'd glimpsed by accident, a name she didn't recognize. Clara. She dismissed it at first, but then came the late nights at the office, the distant excuses, and the scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his clothes. It took weeks of quiet digging, piecing together subtle clues. The truth unraveled slowly but inevitably. Clara wasn't just a coworker. She was his lover. Evelyn had waited for this moment. She had perfected every detail, biding her time until the stakes were just right. And now, surrounded by family and friends who adored Daniel, she held the final card. Everyone. Evelyn's voice rang out across the patio, silencing the hum of conversation. All eyes turned to her, some surprised, others curious. She raised her glass, her posture poised. I just wanted to take a moment to celebrate my incredible husband. Daniel's face froze in a polite but wary smile. He hadn't expected this. Evelyn could see the nervous flicker in his eyes as he raised his glass in response. For 10 years, you've been my partner, my confidant. Evelyn began, her voice steady and warm. And tonight, surrounded by all the people who love you most, I think it's time we honor your remarkable ability to balance work and family. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Daniel chuckled awkwardly, unsure where this was going. In fact, Evelyn continued, her smile sharp, I think we should give a special thanks to someone who's made all of that possible. Clara. She turned, scanning the crowd as if searching. Oh, Clara. There you are. A stunned silence fell over the gathering as a young woman near the buffet table turned white. Clara Peters, Daniel's junior colleague, stood frozen, her plate trembling in her hands. Daniel's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the patio stones. Evelyn, he hissed, stepping forward, his voice low. What are you doing? What I should have done months ago, Evelyn replied coolly, her eyes not leaving Clara's. Clara, why don't you tell everyone here how much Daniel means to you? Clara stammered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what you're talking about. Evelyn raised her brow. Oh, don't be modest. Those late nights at the office? The business trips? The matching bracelets I found in his drawer. She turned to the crowd. Did you know Daniel even took Clara to the same resort we visited on our honeymoon? Isn't that romantic? The atmosphere turned icy. Relatives exchanged uneasy glances, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Daniel grabbed Evelyn's arm, his grip tight. Enough, he growled under his breath. You're making a scene. No, Daniel, Evelyn snapped, pulling her arm free. You made this scene the moment you decided to betray me. I'm just giving it the audience it deserves. Clara bolted, leaving her plate forgotten on the table. Daniel followed, but not before the judgmental stares of his family burned into his back. Evelyn stood alone in the center of the crowd, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. As the gathering slowly dispersed, whispers trailing behind, Evelyn allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The affair had shattered her trust, but tonight, she had shattered Daniel's facade. The aftermath of Evelyn's revelation rippled through the family like a shockwave. By the next morning, the estate, which had been buzzing with excitement the day before, felt subdued and heavy. Evelyn stood on the veranda, watching as the staff cleared away the remnants of the celebration. Her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, but her mind was far from calm. Daniel hadn't come home that night, not that she expected him to. She'd seen the look in his eyes, half fury, half shame, as he stormed off after Clara. Evelyn didn't care where he went. What mattered was that the truth was out, and the foundation of his carefully constructed image had crumbled. By noon, the calls began. First, Daniel's mother, Margaret, who had always adored Evelyn for her poise and intelligence. "Evelyn, dear, what happened last night?" Margaret's voice was hushed, a mix of concern and disapproval. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Exactly what it looked like, Margaret. Your son has been having an affair with his coworker. I decided it was time everyone knew the truth." Margaret hesitated, as if searching for words that wouldn't betray her own disappointment. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, truly. But was it necessary to air this in front of everyone? Was it necessary for Daniel to betray me?" Evelyn's voice was calm but firm. "You raised a man who thrives on appearances. I took that away from him. I won't apologize for it." The line went silent before Margaret sighed heavily. "I hope you know what you're doing." Evelyn ended the call without responding. By evening, Daniel's car finally pulled into the driveway. She heard the crunch of gravel under his tires, followed by the slam of a door. He entered the house, his tie loosened, his face drawn. "Evelyn," he began, his voice quieter than she expected. "We need to talk." Evelyn didn't move from the kitchen counter where she was slicing an apple. "Talk? Now you want to talk? Where was this urgency before?" "I made a mistake," he admitted, stepping closer. "I'm not excusing what I did. But did you have to humiliate me in front of my family?" She placed the knife down carefully and turned to face him. "Daniel, you humiliated yourself. I just gave them a glimpse of the real you. You've spent years crafting this image of the perfect husband, the successful man. Did you think I'd let you continue that while you tore me apart behind closed doors?" "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his voice faltering. Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't want to hurt me? You had an affair, Daniel. That's not an accident. That's a choice. And you made it over and over again." He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know what you want me to say. I messed up. But we can fix this." Evelyn leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Fix it? Daniel, this isn't a cracked vase we can glue back together. You didn't just break my trust, you destroyed it. And you've made me question every moment of our life together. Was any of it real?" "It was," he said quickly. "It is. I love you, Evelyn." "Love?" she said, her voice sharp. "You don't betray someone you love." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel looked away, unable to meet her gaze. For the first time, Evelyn saw him as something less than the polished man she'd married. He looked small, vulnerable, almost pathetic. "I've already called a lawyer," she said quietly. "I think it's best if we separate." Daniel's head snapped up. "Evelyn, no. We can work through this. Please." But her resolve was firm. "This isn't just about us, Daniel. It's about me. I refuse to spend another moment in a marriage built on lies. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Daniel sat in stunned silence as Evelyn left the room, her footsteps echoing through the house. Upstairs, she closed the door to their bedroom, the room that once held so much love but now felt like a hollow shell, and leaned against it, her heart heavy but her mind clear. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt the weight of indecision lift from her shoulders. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was hers now to reclaim. In the days that followed, Daniel moved out of the house. Evelyn insisted on it. She couldn't bear the suffocating tension of shared space, the ghost of their shattered marriage haunting every corner. He tried to stay near, occupying a small apartment not far from the estate, but Evelyn avoided his calls and texts unless they were about logistics. She needed distance, clarity. Word of the scandal spread quickly through their social circles. Evelyn became the subject of hushed sympathy at luncheons and pitying glances at charity events. But she faced it all with unshakable composure, refusing to let the whispers affect her. If anything, they fueled her determination to rise above it. Meanwhile, Daniel's life began to unravel in ways Evelyn hadn't anticipated. The affair with Clara was far from a simple fling, and the fallout at his firm was swift. Clara, facing scrutiny from colleagues, filed a formal complaint against Daniel, claiming he had abused his position of authority. It wasn't true, at least Evelyn didn't think so, but the damage was done. The board launched an internal investigation, and Daniel was placed on administrative leave. One evening, Evelyn received an unexpected visitor. Clara. The knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and certainly not the woman who had upended her life. Opening the door, Evelyn found Clara standing on the porch, her eyes puffy and red. She looked far younger than Evelyn remembered from the reunion, her confidence stripped away. "I'm sorry to bother you," Clara began hesitantly. I didn't know where else to go." Evelyn considered slamming the door in her face. She owed this woman nothing, but something in Clara's trembling voice made her pause. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. Clara perched on the edge of the sofa, twisting her hands nervously. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I needed to say, I'm sorry." Evelyn crossed her arms, her expression cold. "Sorry doesn't erase what you've done." "I know," Clara admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't think—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I thought I loved him, but he used me, Evelyn. He told me he was unhappy, that you didn't understand him. And I believed him." Evelyn's chest tightened. The anger she'd carried for months surged anew. But it wasn't just for Clara. It was for Daniel. "He lied to both of us," she said, her voice hard. "That's what he does." Clara nodded, her tears spilling over. "He's ruined my life. I've lost my job. My reputation is in shreds. And now, I don't even know who I am anymore." Evelyn watched her, conflicted. She wanted to despise this woman, to blame her entirely. But looking at Clara now, broken and remorseful, Evelyn realized something surprising. Clara wasn't the enemy. Daniel was. "I don't know what you expect from me," Evelyn said after a long silence. "Forgiveness? Redemption?" Clara shook her head. "No, I wanted you to know the truth. And to tell you, for what it's worth, that I admire you. You didn't deserve any of this." Evelyn exhaled slowly, her anger softening into a cold, distant resolve. "No, I didn't. But I'll survive it." Clara left soon after, and Evelyn was left alone with her thoughts. She felt no pity for the young woman, but their conversation had solidified something within her. Daniel's betrayal had been a choice, a calculated act that shattered not just her life but others as well, and he had to face the consequences. 2 days later, Evelyn met with her lawyer. "I want full control of the estate," she said firmly, her hands clasped on the polished desk. "And I want the divorce finalized as quickly as possible. No delays." Her lawyer, a sharp woman with a reputation for winning impossible cases, nodded. "Understood." "And Daniel?" Evelyn's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. "He'll fight me, I'm sure, but he has no ground to stand on. Let him try." The battle that followed was fierce, but Evelyn emerged victorious. The divorce settlement left her with the estate, the majority of their assets, and, most importantly, her dignity intact. Daniel, disgraced and financially drained, retreated further into obscurity. On a crisp autumn morning, Evelyn stood on the veranda, the first hints of dawn breaking over the horizon. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh earth and possibility. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She had reclaimed her life, piece by piece, and she was ready to move forward. The world was hers again. Months passed, and Evelyn began to rebuild her life with a quiet determination that surprised even herself. She filled the silence of the sprawling estate with activity, restoring the neglected gardens, hosting intimate gatherings with friends she could trust, and returning to her passion for painting, which had long been buried beneath the demands of marriage. Slowly but surely, she reclaimed herself. But the shadows of the past weren't so easily banished. One gray November afternoon, Evelyn received an envelope in the mail. It was unmarked with no return address. Curious and slightly wary, she opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photo showed Daniel in a dimly lit bar, leaning in close to yet another woman. His hand rested on her knee, his expression unmistakably familiar. Charming, predatory. Evelyn's stomach churned. She had severed ties with him, but the sight of his betrayal repeating itself still stung. The note was short and chilling. "You thought it was over. It's not. Be careful who you trust." Evelyn's hands shook as she read the words again, the stark letters etched in her mind. This wasn't Daniel's handwriting. She knew it well, but the message was clear. Someone was watching her, someone who knew more than they should. She considered calling the police, but what would she tell them? A cryptic note and a photograph weren't exactly evidence of a crime. Still, the feeling of vulnerability crept into her bones. Who had sent this? And why now? Over the next few days, Evelyn became acutely aware of every sound, every shadow. At night, she double-checked the locks and pulled the curtains tight. She had spent months fighting for her independence, only to feel like a prisoner in her own home. Then came the second envelope. This time it was delivered directly to her door. Evelyn spotted it when she returned from the market, lying innocuously on the doormat. She picked it up with a trembling hand, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Inside was another photograph, this one taken from outside her estate. It showed her standing in the kitchen, her silhouette framed by the window. The note attached read, "You're not as alone as you think." A chill ran down her spine. Someone had been watching her, on her property no less. Panic bubbled beneath her calm exterior, but she refused to let it take over. She called the police this time, explaining the situation to an officer who promised to send a patrol car to check the grounds. But the patrol found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Whoever was sending the messages was careful, meticulous. Evelyn decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator, a retired detective named Mark Henson, whose reputation for solving complex cases preceded him. He was in his early 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "The first thing we need to do is look at who might have a motive," Mark said during their initial meeting in Evelyn's study. "Someone's clearly trying to scare you. Any recent enemies? Besides your ex-husband, of course." Evelyn hesitated. "There's Clara, the woman he had the affair with, but she came to me months ago, and I don't think she'd do this. Then there's Daniel himself, but this doesn't feel like his style. He prefers direct manipulation." Mark nodded, jotting down notes. "Anyone else? Business rivals? Disgruntled employees?" "No one comes to mind," Evelyn said. "But my social circle, well, gossip spreads fast. There could be someone I've underestimated." Mark spent weeks investigating, digging into Evelyn's past, interviewing neighbors, and even tracking Daniel's recent activities. The results were troubling but inconclusive. Daniel had relocated to another city and appeared to be moving on, albeit in his usual reckless way. Clara had left her job and disappeared from the social scene entirely. None of Evelyn's acquaintances raised any immediate red flags. Then, one night, Evelyn awoke to the sound of shattering glass. Heart pounding, she grabbed the pepper spray she kept in her bedside drawer and crept downstairs. In the living room, a rock lay amid the shards of a broken window. Attached to it was another note, written in the same jagged hand. "You can't hide from the truth." Evelyn's fear turned to fury. She was tired of being stalked, of feeling powerless in her own home. This was no longer just harassment, it was personal. She called Mark immediately, and within hours, he arrived, flashlight in hand. They scoured the property together, and this time they found something. Muddy footprints leading from the broken window toward the woods at the edge of the estate. Mark crouched by the tracks, his face grim. "Whoever this is, they're escalating. We need to find them before they take it any further." As the investigation deepened, Evelyn realized that the threads of her past were more tangled than she'd thought. Someone was holding a grudge, someone who knew her secrets, her weaknesses, and whoever it was, They weren't going to stop until they tore down everything she'd worked to rebuild. But Evelyn was done being a victim. Whoever was behind this had underestimated her resolve. The hunter would soon learn what it meant to become the hunted. Mark's investigation intensified after the break-in, and Evelyn's quiet resolve turned into a fierce determination to confront whoever was tormenting her. She couldn't go on living in fear, looking over her shoulder every moment. It was time to end this. Late one night, Mark sat in Evelyn's study, poring over his notes and the evidence they'd collected so far. Evelyn, pacing behind him, sipped a glass of wine to steady her nerves. "Whoever this is," Mark said, tapping his pen against a photograph of the muddy footprints. "They're not a professional. They're bold, but they're sloppy. They want you to feel cornered, but they're making mistakes." Evelyn frowned. "Mistakes? Like what?" Mark pointed to the footprints. "For one, these are fresh and unguarded. No effort to cover their tracks. They're arrogant or desperate, maybe both. And then there's the notes. They're emotional, not calculated. Whoever this is, they're acting on impulse." Evelyn leaned against the desk. "But why? What's the motive?" Mark hesitated. "The notes are telling us something. They keep referencing the truth. That you can't hide from it. That it's not over. It's personal, Evelyn. This isn't just about you leaving Daniel or exposing him at the reunion. There's something deeper." Evelyn's thoughts raced. She considered every grudge, every possible secret that someone could use against her. And then, a long-buried memory surfaced. Her pulse quickened. "There was something," she said slowly, her voice unsteady. "Years ago, before I married Daniel." Mark looked up. "Go on." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I was in a relationship with someone, Simon. It ended badly. He was unstable, obsessive. I had to get a restraining order after he threatened me. But I thought he was out of my life. He moved away, started over. Or so I thought." Mark's expression darkened. "Why didn't you mention this earlier?" "I didn't think it could be him," Evelyn said. "It's been over a decade, and he's never tried to contact me before." Mark nodded grimly. "Obsession doesn't just disappear. It festers. If it's Simon, he might see Daniel's fall as an opportunity to insert himself back into your life. Let me dig into his whereabouts." 2 days later, Mark called Evelyn with news that chilled her to the core. "It's Simon," he confirmed over the phone. "He's been living under the radar, no steady job, no permanent address. But I found out he's been in this area for the past 6 months. I also found a court record. He violated another restraining order a few years ago with a different woman. He has a pattern." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. "What do we do now?" "We trap him," Mark said firmly. "He wants you to feel powerless. But that's his weakness. People like him crave control, and when they think they have it, they make mistakes. We'll use that against him." Mark outlined his plan. They would use Evelyn's property as bait. Cameras had already been installed around the estate, and Mark would be nearby, ready to intervene if Simon showed himself. Evelyn hated the idea of luring him out, but she knew it was the only way to stop him. The night of the operation was tense. Evelyn sat in the dimly lit living room, pretending to read a book. She had left the curtains slightly open, knowing Simon would be watching. Mark was hidden in the woods outside, monitoring the surveillance feeds. Hours passed. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Evelyn's nerves were raw, every shadow and distant rustle making her jump. Then, just after midnight, she heard it. The faint crunch of footsteps outside the window. Her heart pounded as she forced herself to remain calm. She glanced toward the window, pretending to be oblivious, while her mind screamed to run. Then came the sound of glass shifting. Someone was attempting to open the back door. Evelyn stood, walking casually toward the hallway to put distance between herself and the intruder. Her movements were calculated, deliberate, designed to draw Simon in without provoking him. Behind her, she heard the soft creak of the door opening. "Evelyn," a voice called out, low and chilling. "It's been a long time." She froze, gripping her phone tightly. Mark had told her not to engage, but the sound of Simon's voice sent a surge of anger and fear through her. "Why are you doing this, Simon?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I never forgot you," Simon said, stepping into the light. His face was thinner, his eyes sunken but still burning with that familiar intensity. "You ruined me, Evelyn. You left me when I needed you most. And now, after all these years, I see you living this perfect life while I've been in hell." Evelyn took a step back, her gaze locked on him. "You're sick, Simon. You've always been sick." Simon's face twisted with rage. "Don't say that. Don't act like you're better than me. You don't deserve this life, this house, this power. You destroyed me, and now I'm going to destroy you." Before he could take another step, a loud crack shattered the air. Mark burst into the room, his gun drawn and pointed directly at Simon. "Don't move," he barked. Simon froze, his hands trembling. "This isn't over," he spat, but Mark moved swiftly, pinning him to the ground as Evelyn watched, trembling. "It is over," Mark said coldly, cuffing him. "For good." Simon was arrested that night, charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and violating a restraining order. Evelyn finally felt a weight lift from her shoulders, though the scars of his obsession would remain. In the weeks that followed, she found herself standing stronger, her fear replaced by a newfound resilience. She had faced the worst and survived. This time, the truth hadn't broken her. It had set her free. Evelyn's life began to settle after Simon's arrest. The once looming specter of fear had dissipated, replaced by a fragile sense of security. Still, she knew the wounds Simon left behind would take time to heal. For weeks, she avoided the press, her focus shifting inward, toward reclaiming not just her home but her sense of self. Mark became a steady presence in her life. Though their professional relationship had ended with Simon's capture, he often stopped by to check on her, under the pretense of tying up loose ends. Evelyn welcomed the company. For the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone. One crisp winter evening, Evelyn and Mark sat in the study, a fire crackling in the hearth. Mark sipped his coffee, his sharp gaze softer than usual. "You're handling all of this better than most people would," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Simon, the divorce, the fallout with your family, it's a lot." Evelyn gave a faint smile. "It doesn't feel like I'm handling anything. I just survived." Mark studied her for a moment, then nodded. Sometimes that's enough. The silence between them was comfortable, and for a fleeting moment, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time, peace. But peace, she had learned, was fleeting. The next morning, Evelyn received a call from Detective Harris, the lead investigator on Simon's case. His voice was serious, tinged with unease. "Mrs. Hamilton, I need to update you on something regarding Simon's arrest." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "What is it?" "We've been reviewing his possessions, notes, journals, digital files. Most of it's what we expected. Obsessive writings about you, plans to harass you further. But there's something else. Something that implicates someone you know." Evelyn gripped the phone tighter. "Who?" There was a pause before Harris spoke again, his tone measured. "Your ex-husband, Daniel." Her breath caught. "Daniel? What does he have to do with Simon?" "We found correspondence between the two of them," Harris explained. "Emails, mostly. Simon reached out to Daniel a few months ago, offering information about you, about your private life, your weaknesses. It seems Daniel encouraged Simon's behavior, even shared details about your schedule and the estate." Evelyn's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair. "You're telling me Daniel was helping him stalk me?" Harris sighed. "It appears so, though we're still piecing together the full scope. We wanted you to know before we proceed with questioning him. It's possible he could face charges for conspiracy or aiding and abetting." Evelyn hung up, her mind reeling. Just when she thought she had untangled herself from Daniel's web, this revelation dragged her back in. Anger burned in her chest. She had endured Simon's torment, believing it was the act of a deranged man. Now she knew Daniel had fed that fire. She called Mark immediately. Within an hour, he was at the estate, his jaw tight with barely contained rage as she recounted what Harris had told her. "That bastard," Mark muttered, pacing the study. "I knew he was a narcissist, but this is beyond anything I imagined." "What do I do, Mark?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "How do I fight him?" "You've already started," Mark said, his tone firm. "You survived Simon. You took back your life. Now it's time to hold Daniel accountable." The police brought Daniel in for questioning the next day. Evelyn chose not to be present but received updates through Harris and her lawyer. Daniel, predictably, denied everything, claiming the emails were taken out of context and that Simon had manipulated him. But the evidence was damning. Weeks later, the district attorney filed charges against Daniel for conspiracy and reckless endangerment. The trial became a media sensation, with reporters salivating over the scandal of a wealthy, disgraced businessman orchestrating his ex-wife's harassment. Evelyn faced the publicity with the same quiet dignity she had throughout the ordeal, her resolve unshaken. When the trial concluded, Daniel was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. It wasn't a long sentence, but it was enough. Enough to prove that even the untouchable could be brought to justice. Months after the trial, Evelyn found herself standing in her garden, the first blossoms of spring pushing through the soil. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the promise of renewal. Mark joined her, hands in his pockets, his presence as steady as ever. "You're free now," he said, his voice soft. Evelyn nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe." Mark looked at her, his expression unreadable. "So, what's next?" She turned to him, her gaze steady. "Whatever I want. For once, the future is mine." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Evelyn's newfound freedom was a strange, exhilarating thing. After years of living under the weight of betrayal, fear, and manipulation, she was finally able to carve out a life of her own. But freedom, she realized, came with its own kind of emptiness. The estate felt quieter than ever, and the echoes of her past still lingered in its halls. Mark continued to visit, though less frequently now that the legal battles were over. Their conversations grew lighter, more personal, yet unspoken tensions simmered between them, something neither dared to address outright. Evelyn appreciated his companionship, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone else into her life so deeply. Not yet. One evening, Evelyn stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner when her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it, her chest tightening with unease. "You think it's over, but it's not. I know what you did." Her blood ran cold. The words were blunt, menacing, and all too familiar. Memories of Simon and the cryptic notes flooded back. But this felt different. The tone wasn't obsessive. It was accusatory. Evelyn immediately called Mark. He arrived within the hour, his expression grim as she showed him the message. "Who could this be?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Simon is in prison. Daniel, too. I thought this nightmare was over." Mark studied the message carefully. It could be someone connected to either of them. A friend, a colleague, someone who feels they were wronged because of what happened. Evelyn shook her head. "I don't understand. What could they possibly mean by, 'I know what you did'?" Mark's jaw tightened. "That's what we need to figure out." The messages continued over the next week, each one more cryptic than the last. They came at all hours, always from different numbers, making them nearly impossible to trace. Evelyn grew increasingly paranoid, checking over her shoulder and double-locking her doors. She refused to let this new threat consume her, but the stress was undeniable. Then, one day, a package arrived at her door. Small, unmarked, and heavy. It sat ominously on the marble countertop as Evelyn stared at it, her hands trembling. Mark arrived soon after, and together they opened it. Inside was a stack of documents, old, weathered, and stamped with the insignia of a law firm Evelyn didn't recognize. At the top of the pile was a single handwritten note. "Justice wasn't served. Fix this or I will." Mark flipped through the documents, his face darkening as he read. "These are contracts, deeds, and financial records," some from years ago. It looks like they belong to your ex-husband's business. Evelyn furrowed her brow. Why would someone send these to me? I've been out of Daniel's affairs for years. Mark stopped on a particular page, his expression turning grave. Evelyn, this shows fraudulent activity. Big sums of money funneled into offshore accounts. Daniel must have been embezzling, and someone knew about it. Evelyn's heart sank. She had always known Daniel was morally bankrupt, but this was on another level. Do you think this is what they're talking about? What I did? Do they think I was involved? It's possible, Mark said. Or they think you know something you haven't shared. Either way, someone wants this exposed, and they're using you to do it. Evelyn spent the next several days poring over the documents with Mark's help. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. Daniel had orchestrated a massive financial scheme, stealing millions from his company and its investors. Worse, some of the records suggested ties to dangerous individuals, criminals who wouldn't take kindly to being double-crossed. As the pieces fell into place, Evelyn's fear morphed into anger. She had been a pawn in Daniel's games for far too long, even after their divorce. Now, his sins were coming back to haunt her. What do we do with this? Evelyn asked Mark one evening as they sat surrounded by the damning evidence. Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. We take it to the authorities. It's risky, but it's the right thing to do. If we sit on this, whoever's sending those messages might escalate. Evelyn hesitated. And what if they're not satisfied? What if exposing this isn't enough for them? Mark's gaze softened. Then we deal with it together. You're not alone in this, Evelyn. She nodded, drawing strength from his words. She had faced worse and survived. She could face this too. Within days, Evelyn handed the documents over to the district attorney's office, along with a detailed statement of what she knew. The process was grueling, reopening old wounds and thrusting her back into the public eye, but she endured it with quiet resilience. The investigation into Daniel's crimes reopened, and soon new charges were filed against him. The media frenzy reignited, painting Evelyn as both a victim and an unlikely whistleblower. But as much as she hated the attention, she knew it was the only way to protect herself and bring closure to the nightmare. The messages stopped after the story broke. Whoever had been tormenting her disappeared, their mission apparently fulfilled. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, more shadows waiting to emerge. One evening, as she stood on the veranda watching the sun dip below the horizon, Mark joined her, a quiet presence by her side. You did the right thing, he said, his voice low. Evelyn nodded, though her gaze remained distant. Maybe, but it doesn't feel like it's over. Mark glanced at her, his expression steady. Whatever comes next, you'll handle it. You've proven that. She turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. And what about you, Mark? Will you be there when it does? His answer was simple, his voice resolute. Always. And for the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to believe it. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready. This time, she wouldn't face it alone. The following months brought Evelyn a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. The fallout from Daniel's crimes rippled through their former social circle, severing ties and forcing Evelyn to step fully into the role she had long avoided, that of a survivor and a fighter. With the criminal investigation underway and the media's attention beginning to fade, she found herself at the cusp of a new chapter. The estate, once a prison of memories and fear, became a sanctuary again. Evelyn poured her energy into renovating its neglected corners, turning the once cold rooms into spaces filled with warmth and life. The garden flourished under her care, vibrant blooms stretching toward the sun, a reflection of her own slow but steady healing. Mark remained by her side, though his visits grew less about business and more about companionship. He had become a constant in her life, a steady hand guiding her through the chaos. Evelyn found herself leaning on him in ways she hadn't expected, though she hesitated to admit how much his presence meant to her. One late spring evening, Evelyn invited Mark to dinner. A simple, quiet meal in the garden. The air was filled with the scent of blooming jasmine, and the soft glow of lanterns illuminated the table. I don't think I've ever seen you this relaxed, Mark said. raising his glass in a small toast. Evelyn smiled, a genuine one this time. It's been a long time coming. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. But Evelyn knew there was one last thing she needed to say, one final piece of closure she had to share. "Mark," she began, setting her fork down and meeting his gaze. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." He tilted his head, his expression curious but patient. "I'm listening." Evelyn took a deep breath. "When all of this started, the divorce, Simon, the messages, I thought I'd never come out of it, that I'd always be stuck in this cycle of fear and betrayal. But you changed that. You reminded me that I'm stronger than I thought." Mark's brow furrowed, his voice soft. "You didn't need me to remind you of that, Evelyn. You had it in you all along." "Maybe," she said with a small laugh. "But I didn't believe it until you showed me. You gave me hope when I couldn't find it myself. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Mark reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You don't have to thank me. I was just doing what felt right." For a moment, they sat like that, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. Evelyn felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Trust. Not just in Mark, but in the possibility of happiness again. As summer approached, Evelyn found herself embracing the unknown. She had been defined by others for so long. Daniel's wife, Simon's victim, the subject of scandal and gossip. But now, she was simply Evelyn. A woman who had weathered the storm and come out stronger. She began to take steps toward a future she hadn't dared to imagine. She joined a local art collective, displaying her paintings for the first time in years. She hosted gatherings at the estate, filling it with laughter and music once more. And with Mark's gentle encouragement, she began to let people into her life again, forming bonds that weren't defined by the shadows of her past. One evening, as the sun set over the estate, casting golden light across the garden, Evelyn stood at the edge of the veranda. Mark joined her, a quiet smile on his face. "Beautiful night," he said. "It is," she agreed, her voice light. "It feels peaceful." Mark nodded, then turned to her. "You deserve that, Evelyn. Peace, happiness, everything good." She looked at him, the corners of her lips turning up. "Maybe for the first time I believe that." As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Evelyn took a deep breath. The ghosts of her past no longer haunted her. They were merely echoes, faint and distant. She had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, stronger and more certain of herself than ever before. And as she stood there, with Mark by her side and the future stretching out before her, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. The life she had reclaimed was hers to live, fully and unapologetically. Finally, she was free.